All right, so what we're going to do is this tutorial is going to be for sculpting, and what we're going to do on this one is we're basically going to take what we have here and put it into Mudbox. Okay, so that being said, what we need to do is just make sure that everything is hunky-dory. All right, so first off, I'm just going to get these image planes out of the way so I just don't see them in this view. So I'm just going to go to Show, Viewport, and we're going to turn image planes off so that they are no longer visible. I'm also going to turn the waffle off so I can get rid of the grid. And that way they will still be visible in the other views, but they just won't be in this view because they're not really necessarily helpful in this one. Once again, just make sure that you have all the elements that break the silhouette, so that everything that is protruding or concaved or something that you would see if this was, I'm going to hit 7, which is the light mode. You can also just click this button here. Basically, that you would, if it's an element that should be seen while in silhouette mode, it should be represented. That's seen in the silhouette, it should be represented, right? So if this guy had like big spikes coming off, those should be modeled in there, right? Or if he had a tail, or maybe these are supposed to be more claw-like for his feet. Those should be represented. All right. So this is a good little trick to do to just make sure that the silhouette value makes sense for what you have. Once you know that it has all the other elements, the other thing you want to do is just make sure that your polygons are generally even, right? See how most of them, they're not going to be 100%. This one's obviously bigger than this one. And in some cases, I can't do it either. Like this is just a more detailed area than this. So these are not going to be the same size as that. But we want to try and make them as even as possible because we're going to be using this for sculpting, and we'll get much more reliable, consistent results if we're using, even sized polys. Okay, so that should be good. The other thing I want to do is make sure there's no errors. So another thing you can do is hit 3 to go into the subdivision mode. And then you just want to look to see if there's anything that is like any seams or any kind of weird incongruencies, anything like that that might cause some sort of issue. Like maybe these vertices didn't get merged, or maybe there's faces on the inside that you don't see, like non-manifold geometry. You just want to look for any errors. 3 is a really good, useful tool for that. So I'm just going to click that. I had 2. I'm going to click and go back to 1. That looks fine. Another thing that I need to do before I bring this into Mudbox is actually project the UVs. It's not required, but Mudbox is going to complain about it if we don't do it. So what I want to do is go up here, move this bar out of the way. Okay, I can't. There it goes. Okay, we're going to hit, you guys can't see it, but I have a bar up here for my video. So I'm going to go to the UV editor. Actually, I don't even need that. Well, I'll show you anyway. This is what the UV editor looks like. See, it's all over the place because it's just representing the primitive UVs. When I'm creating the primitive shapes, these, it's just showing what was built there initially. So all we got to do is I'm just going to go to UV, and I'm just going to choose automatic. I just want to make sure the whole thing has UVs. I really don't care much what the UVs look like because we're not keeping them anyway. So now if I go to UV editor, you'll see that everything is represented. Maybe not in a nice way, but they're all there. That's fine. Okay. It just makes things a little bit easier to work with. Another problem we're going to have when we go to sculpt. Oh, if you do have any other errors, another thing we should have done this in the last video, but another thing you can also do is if you go to mesh, you do clean up, hit the option box, clean up matching polygons, and then faces with more than 4 sides, and lamina and non-manifold, you want to remove those. This will fix by tessellation. It means if it's an n-gon, it's going to put tris there. That's what we want, okay? And then you just hit clean up, voila. The other thing that's going to be an issue, I'm just going to put this grid back on so you can see. This grid, each one of these units is a centimeter, which means this guy is roughly like, 10 centimeters tall. When we go to sculpt, you can sculpt it, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and just scale this guy up considerably. Theoretically, you want your character to be the correct size. So if you want to figure out the math with that, you can go ahead and do that. But just making him larger is good enough for now. You do actually want the model to scale, even though everything's relative when we're working in 3D. If for some reason I was using any sort of physics on this, if he's smaller than he actually would be in real life, let's say there's cloth or something, it's going to look like the physics will represent that, right? The physics are based on world space. So it will matter. For modeling, we can always scale it before we actually do the rigging elements, but in this case, we are going to want to make sure that this is at least large enough to sculpt right now. So I'm just going to make it really big like that. And then once we do that, you can see it's actually what it is, scale times 9 right now. It might bring it in that way. So I just want to make sure we do modify freeze transformations. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to clear the history just to make sure that there's nothing that gets kind of jumbled up. So just do edit, delete all by type and history, and that will remove the history. You kind of want to do that while you're working anyway, just so that you, it might get bogged down or you might get weird errors if you have history on the model as you're working. Okay, that all looks fine. The model looks good. We're good to go. So now what I want to do is actually export this out. So what you want to do is have the model selected, go to File, Export Selection, and then I'm going to name it to Mudbox Rough Sculpt, and you want to choose, just scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see OBJ Export, okay? And I like to turn off all of these things. I don't really need any of that. And then I'll hit Export Selection. Now, yeah, I'm just going to replace. Yours won't be replaced. I already did this earlier, just as like kind of a prep. The reason why we're doing an OBJ, you might be familiar if you've worked in Unity, right? Usually when we take things from Maya or another program, we will use FBX. FBX is a really awesome file format, and if I can only have one, that's the one I would choose. If I can only have one file format, FBX can contain the model, it can contain the texturing, you know, the UVs obviously, also some rigging, right? It'll have joints, it'll have weights. You can even have like lighting and other elements in there, right? It basically can contain all of the generic 3D elements that you might have in one program to another one without any of the proprietary things that maybe like Maya might have, but, you know, 3D Studio Max doesn't, or Cinema 4D has, and then this one doesn't. But it has most of the elements, so it's very useful for transferring things, you know, animations and what have you, from Maya to, let's say, Unity or Unreal, whatever game engine, or whatever other program you're using. If you're using like a third-party rendering solution and you have to export out an FBX, super handy. The problem is that it contains all those elements. So I could take this and export this out as an FBX and bring it in as an FBX inside of Mudbox, which is fine, but there might be extra baggage. When you do an OBJ, that's a super, super duper generic file format. That only contains the model. It'll contain the model, the UV information, and I think normals. It also will have the material, but it doesn't transfer 100%, so I'm not as worried. You'll see a lot of times it'll make a .mat file as well. But it's just the model itself. It doesn't have any of the other stuff, which means it doesn't have any of the extra history or any of those other things. It's a cleaner file. It'll also be smaller. So I like using the OBJ and not the FBX to transfer this, because I'm actually using it as a way of sort of cleaning the file, so that if there is anything weird, it'll actually go away when I transfer this over as well. There is also another, if for some reason you don't see OBJ as an option, you might see if you go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager. If you scroll down, this is alphabetical. So scroll down until I get to O. There you go, OBJ Export. Just make sure that Loaded and Auto Loaded is on. You don't have to restart it. You just click those and then maybe refresh and close. And then that should be an option for your export. If you notice, we're not using it right now, but FBX is also in here, so you can see FBX. Make sure those are on. If you needed that for something else, that's also here. Technically, they're both plugins, which is kind of weird, but anyway, that's what they are. So you might want to turn those on too. There is another way of actually sending, if you're familiar with this, I just want to acknowledge it. There is another way of sending to Mudbox. If you have the model selected, you can go File, and you can actually go Send to Mudbox and send it as a new scene. I think it will actually open up Mudbox if it's not already open, or you can update current scene. What's nice about this is that when you send this way, it'll send the model over. You can work in Mudbox, and then in Mudbox, you can go send back to Maya, and it will actually update this file with the new model. So they're sort of linked as you're working. So you can like make changes here, then it'll switch back, and you can go back and forth real fluidly. But I still don't like that because the format that it's using in order to do this is an FBX. It doesn't show you that, but that's what it's using. And there's just extra nodes you'll see that are made, and I just don't like the idea of those being there. I just want to keep it clean. So this does exist. I've had like mixed results using it, but I would just suggest, and what we're going to do is just the OBJ, but I do want you to be aware that this does exist. You might have tried using the send to Unity thing. Again, I actually just usually save it as an MB and let Unity convert it to an FBX for me. But technically, you really should export this out as an FBX to bring in. But anyway, so we did that. We exported as an OBJ. Then what you want to do is open up Mudbox. Okay. Oh, I already did this earlier, so I'm going to do File, New. File, New Scene. Don't save. Okay. Now, when you first open up Mudbox, the very first time, it's going to have another window, and it's going to say, what do you want your hotkeys to be? Just go ahead and choose Maya. just because that way it will be the same as Maya and it'll be a little bit easier. That's the format that I'm going to be using that's the method I'm going to be using myself. So I would choose Maya as the option, okay? If you didn't do that, I'll show you how to fix it in a second. So you should hopefully end up here. You just hit open. If for some reason you hit close, you just hit file open here. Navigate to that OBJ that you selected and hit open, and voila, here it is. Now, if for some reason that you didn't set up the Maya hotkeys correctly, like on that initial loading screen, just go to Windows Hotkeys, and right up on the top here, you can choose, I don't know what you would have chosen, but you can choose Maya, and then, you know, that will be Maya then. You can also see all the hotkeys. So if there's like, oh, how do I do something, or what's that hotkey again? You can just look through here, and you'll be able to see there's a bunch of them, right? Anyway, so that's how you do that. Now, if you load this up, it might show, you might get a window and it says, oh, you've got valence, I was going to say valence electrons. What's it called? There's a name for it. But basically, you have too many edges going to a single vertex, which is basically like a pole, or you have non-manifold geometry, or you have some sort of weird error. And what it'll do is it'll actually have these little like red dots or red lines and stuff that represent where the errors are, which is actually really handy. If possible, what I would like you to do, if you run into that, is go back to Maya, find where that is, and see if you can fix it. You might be able to fix it just using the mesh cleanup that I showed earlier. Theoretically, we would have already done that. If that didn't work, you might have to just, you know, delete those spaces, rebuild that section, and then try re-importing it in again. If it just keeps happening, but it seems like it's probably fine, you can turn off those errors by just going to, or at least the visibility of them, by going to display and turning mesh errors off. So display mesh errors. Stop chewing that? Sorry, that's my dog. Going to mesh errors, and you can turn that off, and then those little dots will go away. But the main thing we need to be able to make sure that you can do is that if you want to try and run even with them having the errors, is just hit Shift D, which will subdivide the model, or you can just do it this way. Go to Mesh, and then Add New Subdivision Level. And make sure that it will subdivide. If it will not subdivide, your model is a no-go. You have to make the fixes. If it will subdivide, even with the errors, then so be it. Although you might see that it doesn't subdivide quite the way that you were hoping, okay? Just be aware. After you subdivide, just hit page down. I'm going to cover the hotkeys in the next video. But at this point, you should have the model in here. You should be kind of set up to go. Everything should be hunky-dory. I'm going to turn off the grid as well. I don't find that particularly helpful. And in the next video, we will start sculpting.